Environmental sound design is a crucial aspect of video games, and especially so for open-world RPGs. Knowing your character's location in relationship to the world as well as various NPCs and enemies is often an important part of mastering gameplay and completing the story. So I want to talk briefly about the relationship between sound design, score, and the minimap. And to do that, I'm going to compare two pretty recent open-world fantasy RPGs, The Witcher 3: Wild Hunt and Horizon Zero Dawn. Both games play relatively similarly. You're a character whose name is pronounced slightly differently than you assumed, who is off to save the world, or at least your adoptive daughter, from a very powerful malevolent force. You travel around on your trusty-ish steed to accomplish your main goal, but with many side quests along the way to help people you run into. And since these games involve travel throughout a vast open world, they provide a map for the player. But The Witcher provides an additional mini-map on the screen, while Horizon Zero Dawn doesn't. And this affects the soundscape and soundtrack in a couple of really interesting ways. First off, there are a lot of ways to define the function of soundscapes in video games. And often sounds and music can shift from one category to another quite easily. The broadest categories are borrowed from film: diegetic and non-diegetic. But as Karen Collins discusses in her chapter, Gameplay, Genre, and the Functions of Game Audio, it gets more complicated than that. Both categories can be split further into dynamic and non-dynamic, interactive, non-interactive, and adaptive and non-adaptive. Most of what I'm talking about falls into the interactive, non-diegetic category. It's music that's occurring in reaction to gameplay, which can react to the player directly, but which are also outside the diegesis. Where this applies here is the fight music that plays when your character inevitably gets into a scuffle. And this is where the minimap comes into play. In The Witcher, enemies show up on your minimap as little red dots. You can often see them from far enough away that you can avoid them entirely if you choose. Since the player is warned visually of oncoming danger, there's really no need to reinforce that sonically. By the time the intense battle music starts, Geralt's already in the fray.
That stench.
So while occasionally you hear a wolf howling in the distance, it functions as set dressing for the most part. But without a minimap, Horizon Zero Dawn doesn't have that visual warning. It relies on sound, both from the environment and the soundtrack, to alert the player of enemies nearby. Since the enemies are giant dinosaur robots, their sounds stick out from the rest of the naturalistic landscape. But this isn't the only way enemies' locations are indicated. When you're close enough to an enemy before you can be seen by them, the score shifts from calm traveling music to anticipatory. It's not intense battle music yet, but it communicates for the player to be cautious. As Robin J. Stillwell says, unidentifiable, unlocatable sound is disturbing because we, potential prey, are alerted to potential threat. It makes us uneasy. We look around for visual ground. So I would argue this type of music in Horizon Zero Dawn marks a change in the diegesis between that game and The Witcher. While The Witcher's score is almost always non-diegetic, Horizons exists in the fantastical gap described by Robin J. Stillwell, the place between diegetic and non-diegetic. It's certainly music that's not being produced in the environment of the scene, but its reaction with the environment and the way it relays information makes its role much more than just that of non-diegetic atmosphere building. I would go so far as to say it serves as almost a form of translation between the character of Aloy and the player. A message that she, a tracker, senses something close by, and is relaying this information to you, the player, through a change in the music. And this is why I think it falls into the fantastical gap. It's information received diegetically, but translated outside the diegesis to inform the player. So how does gameplay fit into this? Well, first of all, Horizon Zero Dawn has a stealth component, and The Witcher 3 doesn't. So there's no real need to have music in between traveling and fighting. Geralt's not going to be sneaking around in the brush like Aloy does. But that intermediary state that stealth introduces indicates a change of tone that requires a thematically different score. Now, sound isn't the only way potential enemies in Horizon Zero Dawn are located. There are also directional indicators that pop up above them when they notice you. This lets you know if they're looking around for you, yellow, or aggressively pursuing you, red. This covers the 3 key aspects of enemy and NPC location as stated by Stevens, Raybould, and McDermott. Where are they? Can they see me? Are they actively pursuing me? They continue. Such state and direction indicators are so commonplace as to become an almost unquestionable grammar of games, but they are indispensable only because of the limited field of view, poor spatialization of sound, and limited dynamic range necessitated by the unpredictability of playback environments. It would be interesting to see sound used independently of visual icons, state and direction indicators, or mechanics to convey enemy and NPC location in games. It would be a tall order, requiring players to adapt to gameplay that shifts from what would be expected of these kinds of games, and the soundscape would have to be able to convey a lot of important information to the player without becoming too unruly or frustrating. But putting emphasis on the sonic environment to be the sole source of enemy location could draw the player in, forcing them to listen closely and become more attuned to the environment their character inhabits. But even just looking at these recent releases, it's interesting to see the relationship between the mechanics, gameplay, minimap, and soundscape, and how it changes typical notions of diegetic categorization.